Imagine driving down a highway. You trust that the high-tech safety features in your car, like airbags, will protect you in a crash. But what if the device meant to save your life becomes the one that kills? What if the pop of safety turns into an explosion of metal shards? This story begins with a Japanese company that built a global reputation for safety components. Decades of trust, thousands of engineers, millions of airbags, and then a defect. One small change in chemical propellant, one overlooked flaw, one mechanism that, under heat and humidity, could turn into a bomb in your steering wheel. This isn't theory. It's real. Lives were lost, vehicles recalled by the millions, lawsuits, bankruptcies, a scandal that exposed how corners were cut and how the cost of safety ignored sometimes meant ignoring lives. Today, we dive into the Takata airbag scandal, how it started, why it escalated, who was responsible, and why even today, tens of millions of drivers are still at risk. Chapter 1. The Rise of Takata and the Hidden Danger. In the world of automotive safety, few names once carried as much weight as Takata Corporation. Founded in 1933 in Japan, the company started modestly, producing woven textiles before pivoting into a highly specialized and high-stakes market, automotive safety systems. Over the decades, Takata evolved from a domestic seatbelt manufacturer into a global supplier of life-saving devices, including seatbelts, child restraint systems, and most notably, airbags. By the early 2000s, Takata had become a dominant force in the global airbag industry, supplying parts to major automakers like Honda, Toyota, Ford, BMW, and more. It was a supplier trusted not just with quality, but with life-or-death technology. But as Takata expanded its footprint across the globe, from its Tokyo headquarters to factories in North America, Europe, Mexico, and beyond, something shifted. Behind the scenes, in the labs and manufacturing plants, small changes were made in the name of efficiency, profitability, and production speed. These changes, though seemingly minor, would eventually set off a chain reaction that would become the largest, most deadly auto safety recall in history. At the heart of the coming crisis was a single decision: the switch to ammonium nitrate as the primary propellant in Takata's airbag inflators. The propellant problem airbags are designed to save lives. When a collision is detected, a sensor sends an electrical signal to the inflator, which rapidly ignites a chemical propellant. This explosion fills the airbag with gas, cushioning the driver or passenger from impact. The entire process takes milliseconds. Traditionally, airbag inflators used a stable chemical compound, like sodium azide, to inflate the bags. But sodium azide was expensive, toxic, and hazardous to handle. By the early 2000s, Takata began shifting to a cheaper, more readily available alternative: ammonium nitrate. On paper, ammonium nitrate was appealing. It's used in everything from fertilizer to mining explosives. It's powerful and cost-effective. But there's a catch. It's extremely sensitive to moisture, temperature changes, and age. Over time, especially in hot and humid environments, ammonium nitrate becomes unstable. When ignited, it can combust too violently, causing the metal inflator to rupture and send shrapnel into the vehicle cabin. This wasn't a theoretical risk. Internal testing at Takata reportedly showed early signs that ammonium nitrate-based inflators degraded over time, especially when exposed to heat and humidity. Yet, despite these warnings, Takata pressed forward. The cost savings were too good to pass up, and competitors were moving in similar directions. What began as a chemical shortcut would ultimately prove catastrophic. Early warnings and denials, the first signs of trouble emerged quietly. In 2001, Honda reported the first airbag rupture linked to a Takata inflator. In that incident, the airbag deployed during a minor accident, but instead of protecting the driver, it exploded with excessive force. Metal fragments were propelled into the driver's face and chest. The injuries were severe, but it was written off as a fluke, an anomaly in the data. More reports trickled in. In 2003, another Honda vehicle had a similar incident. In 2004, one more. Each time, Takata issued internal explanations. Contaminants in the inflator, improper storage, isolated cases, nothing systemic. At this stage, the automaker most affected was Honda, Takata's largest customer. The two companies had an especially close relationship. Some executives had even worked for both firms during their careers. This proximity may have contributed to a culture of mutual denial. Neither side wanted to believe or admit that a critical safety system they relied upon might be fatally flawed. Mass production, minimal testing throughout the 2000s. Takata rapidly scaled up production of its ammonium nitrate-based inflators. New factories were opened in North America and Mexico. One of the most problematic facilities would later be identified as Takata's plant in Monclova. Mexico reports from former employees and whistleblowers painted a disturbing picture. Shortcuts in quality control, malfunctioning humidity sensors, missing safety inspections, and even manipulation of test data. According to investigative reports, some inflators were sent out the door without being properly sealed, meaning that moisture could enter the propellant chamber and degrade the ammonium nitrate over time. Others were tested in batches, with only random units pulled for review, meaning many defective inflators made it into vehicles undetected. By 2008, the number of vehicles equipped with Takata airbags was in the hundreds of millions. These inflators were ticking time bombs, especially in warm and humid climates such as the southeastern United States, Southeast Asia, and parts of South America. Yet, there was still no full recall. Only small, quiet, limited regional service campaigns and internal technical bulletins. First confirmed deaths. The real-world consequences of Takata's decisions became impossible to ignore in 2009. That year, Ashley Parham, an 18-year-old from Oklahoma, died when the airbag in her 2001 Honda Accord exploded during a minor collision. A piece of metal shrapnel from the inflator struck her in the neck, causing a fatal injury. She was the first confirmed death linked to a Takata airbag rupture. More would follow. In 2010, Kayla Marie Casey died in a similar incident. In 2013, Hyanthi Tran was killed when an inflator exploded in her 2001 Honda Accord in Florida. These weren't high-speed crashes. These were routine fender benders, the kind of incidents airbags were designed to protect against. Each of these deaths had something in common. The airbag didn't just deploy, it exploded. With every new case, pressure mounted. Lawsuits were filed. The media began to take notice. Regulators started to ask questions, and finally, the facade began to crack. Toward the breaking point in 2014, the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, took more aggressive action. After years of limited recalls, it announced the first nationwide safety campaign involving Takata airbags. Initially, the scope covered about 4.7 million vehicles, but as investigations deepened, that number quickly ballooned. By 2015, more than 10 automakers were involved, including Ford, BMW, Toyota, Nissan, and Mazda. Hundreds of injuries had been reported. The death toll was rising. The recalls spread across continents. Takata, under increasing scrutiny, finally admitted the truth. Its airbags were defective. But the admission came too late to stop the largest recall in automotive history. Chapter 2, The Recall Avalanche, a Global Safety Crisis, unfolds by the time the world began to fully grasp the magnitude of the Takata airbag defect. It was already embedded in the lives of millions. Cars across the globe, from compact sedans to luxury SUVs, were unknowingly equipped with potential explosives hidden behind steering wheels and dashboards. And the price of that realization? A recall operation unlike anything the automotive world had ever seen. This chapter explores how a once-contained safety issue spiraled into a worldwide emergency, dragging in governments, regulators, automakers, and millions of unsuspecting drivers. From isolated recalls to a global safety emergency in the early years, Takata and its automaker clients tried to keep the problem confined. Recalls were limited to hot and humid areas, places like Florida, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and parts of Southeast Asia where conditions accelerated the degradation of the airbag's ammonium nitrate propellant. The logic was that the issue wasn't widespread, but regional, but that theory collapsed. Exploding airbag inflators began turning up in non-humid regions, including northern U.S. states and Europe. Reports from Sweden, Germany, and Canada emerged, places where humidity was not a dominant factor. It became increasingly clear that age was just as much of a factor as climate. Time itself was corroding the propellant. By 2015, U.S. authorities had had enough. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, took control of the recall process, issuing what became the largest automotive recall in American history. The scope? Eventually over 70 million airbags across more than 40 million vehicles, just in the United States. Globally, the number soared past 100 million. NHTSA Takata page, automakers in the crosshairs. The recall didn't just affect Takata, it rippled across nearly every major car maker. Honda, Takata's largest client, was hit hardest. More than 12 million of its vehicles were impacted, including bestsellers like the Accord and Civic. Honda quickly became the face of the scandal, both because of its volume and its early knowledge of airbag failures. But others soon followed. Toyota recalled over 6 million vehicles. Ford and Mazda issued millions of recall notices. BMW, Nissan, Subaru, Chrysler, now Stellantis, Volkswagen, and even luxury brands like Ferrari were forced to act. Every manufacturer was caught in the same dilemma. Cars were sold with safety components that could kill the very people they were designed to protect. The logistics nightmare a recall of this scale created an unprecedented logistical challenge. Replacing a faulty inflator isn't as simple as swapping out a tire or updating software. It requires removing the steering wheel or dashboard, accessing deeply embedded safety components, sourcing brand new, redesigned airbag modules, ensuring technicians are trained for the repair. And there was another problem. Takata was the world's second-largest airbag supplier. There simply weren't enough replacement parts to fix the problem immediately. As a stopgap, some automakers installed temporary inflators that were still ammonium nitrate-based, promising future replacements once better parts became available. This controversial decision led to recall within recall situations, where cars were recalled again to replace the temporary solution. Customers were confused. Service departments were overwhelmed. And time was running out. The human toll. Victims speak out behind every recall notice was a human life. The most heartbreaking part of the Takata scandal is that these weren't high-speed crashes. Many of the deaths were caused by low-speed collisions, the kind where the airbag should have saved lives, but instead took them. The stories are haunting. Jewel Brangman, 26, was driving a rented 2001 Honda Civic in Los Angeles in 2014. She rear-ended a van at low speed. The Takata airbag exploded, sending a piece of metal into her neck. She died instantly. Her father, Alexander Brangman, became a vocal advocate for recall transparency, appearing before Congress and in national media. Hyan Tran, 51, was involved in a minor crash in Orlando, Florida. First responders thought she had been stabbed in the neck. Later, it was revealed that metal from her airbag inflator had pierced her throat. Joel Knight, 52, died in South Carolina when his Ford Ranger's airbag ruptured in a minor crash. The metal shrapnel sliced his neck. These were avoidable tragedies. The inflators failed not during violent crashes, but during fender benders, accidents people should have walked away from. By 2023, at least 36 confirmed deaths and over 400 injuries had been directly linked to Takata airbag explosions worldwide. Reuters, lawsuits, fines, and criminal charges. The legal response was as massive as the recall itself. Class action lawsuits flooded in from across the globe. Automakers were sued by customers for selling defective cars. Takata faced criminal charges in the U.S., including wire fraud for falsifying safety data submitted to automakers. In 2017, Takata pleaded guilty to criminal wrongdoing and agreed to pay $1 billion in penalties, including $25 million criminal fine, $125 million for victims, $850 million in restitution to automakers. 3 Takata executives were indicted. Internal documents revealed that engineers had discovered problems as early as 2004, but data was altered or suppressed to hide the defect from regulators and clients. In effect, Takata had prioritized its contracts over consumer safety, a choice that would destroy the company. Exploding trust. Public backlash as news of the scandal spread. Public trust in both Takata and the automakers collapsed. Owners began checking their VIN numbers online. Recall websites crashed from traffic surges. Some drivers disabled their airbags out of fear, ironically making their cars less safe in serious accidents. Congressional hearings in the United States blasted Takata and demanded accountability. Victims' families appeared in front of lawmakers, holding up photos and describing the horror of losing loved ones to shrapnel from a safety device. The scandal wasn't just about defective airbags. It was about a broken system. Manufacturers cutting corners to save costs, suppliers falsifying data, regulators failing to act quickly, and ordinary people dying as a result. Communication failures. Even as recalls grew, many affected drivers never got the message. Vehicles sold through multiple owners were hard to track. Many drivers had no idea they were driving a time bomb. Some automakers sent letters by mail only. Others didn't have up-to-date contact info. A 2019 study showed that over 30% of affected vehicles in the U.S. still had unrepaired airbags, years after recalls began. The communication breakdown wasn't just logistical. It was psychological. Some drivers ignored the warnings, assuming the risk was exaggerated. Others didn't realize their older vehicles still had original, unreplaced inflators. This confusion meant that even as fixes were available, lives continued to be at risk. The scale of the recall to understand how massive the Takata recall became. Consider the numbers. Over a million inflators recalled in the U.S., more than 100 million worldwide, over 20. Automakers affected, 36 plus deaths confirmed, hundreds of injuries, 24 plus billion in total estimated cost. This was not just the largest recall in automotive history. It was a failure of trust between governments, corporations, and consumers, a crisis still unfolding. Even today, the Takata recall is ongoing. Some cars from the early 2000s remain on the road with original defective airbags. In 2023 and 2024, NHTSA and other regulators issued new urgent do not drive warnings for older vehicles at highest risk. These inflators are now over 20 years old, far beyond their intended lifespan. The message is clear. If your car has a Takata airbag, and it hasn't been replaced, you may be driving with a bomb in your dashboard. Chapter 3. Corporate Collapse. Inside Takata's fall from power. Takata Corporation, once a pillar of global automotive safety, didn't implode overnight. Its fall was slow, painful, and riddled with denial, deception, and delayed action. This chapter takes you inside the final years of Takata's operations, into boardrooms, manufacturing plants, and courtrooms, where decisions made, or not made, directly led to the downfall of a multi-billion-dollar empire. While consumers feared their airbags, Takata's leadership feared something else: financial collapse and legal ruin. Takata's global empire. By 2010, Takata was among the big three global airbag suppliers, alongside Autoliv and TRW Automotive. With over 56 factories across 20-plus countries, Takata's reach was staggering. It supplied over 100 million airbags annually, employed more than 40,000 people, and served nearly every major car manufacturer. Its clients included Honda, its largest customer, Toyota, General Motors, BMW, Ford, Nissan, Subaru, Volkswagen, and many more. Takata's inflators were used in both driver-side and passenger-side airbags, as well as in side curtains and knee airbags. That meant that the same flawed chemical compound, ammonium nitrate, was embedded in multiple points throughout the vehicle, multiplying the danger in any given crash. Internal warning signs, ignored or buried. The most damning part of the Takata scandal isn't that they made a mistake, it's that they knew, for years, that something was wrong. Internal documents revealed that Takata engineers discovered abnormal rupture patterns during tests as early as 2004. At one point, a test inflator blew apart with such force that it shredded the test equipment. Rather than raise alarm, some test data was allegedly falsified or modified to hide the dangerous outcomes. Emails obtained during lawsuits showed disturbing communications. We cannot let the customer see this report. Let's revise the graph to make the curve more stable. These failures must be isolated, not representative. These weren't the words of engineers trying to fix a safety issue. They were the words of corporate protectors trying to keep a contract. The role of leadership, denial at the top. Takata's executive team, including then-chairman Shigehisa Takata, appeared detached from the growing crisis. Despite public pressure and mounting fatalities, the company refused to admit systemic failure until 2015, well after the U.S. government and automakers had taken matters into their own hands. Even when Takata issued limited recalls, they were narrowly framed. Executives maintained that only high-humidity climates posed risk, and they claimed they could not confirm a root cause for ruptures. This position directly contradicted third-party studies and Takata's own internal findings. Public relations became the priority. Admissions of guilt were viewed as threats to future sales. The longer they could avoid global responsibility, the longer they could retain clients and revenue. But every delay came with a cost. And that cost wasn't just financial, it was human. Pressure from automakers weren't innocent bystanders in this story. Many relied heavily on Takata not just for inflators, but for complete airbag systems. Switching suppliers mid-production would have meant costly retooling, supply chain delays, and missed sales targets. Behind closed doors, automakers wrestled with a terrible question. If we switch now, are we admitting that our cars are unsafe? In 2012, Honda quietly began diversifying its airbag suppliers. Other automakers followed suit, but most continued using Takata for certain product lines well into the 2010s. Emails revealed that some automakers were aware of the dangers as early as 2009, but didn't act. Their decisions, like Takata's, weighed safety against sales. The result? More vehicles on the road with defective airbags, and more lives at risk. The crisis deepens. Death toll rises. As the body count grew, public outrage intensified. By 2015, over 100 injuries had been confirmed. At least 8 deaths were attributed to Takata inflator ruptures. Multiple class action lawsuits were in motion, and HTSA had issued nationwide recalls involving dozens of automakers. Takata's stock price plummeted. Creditors grew nervous. Major automakers publicly criticized their supplier, even as they continued installing their airbags. To contain the firestorm, Takata offered limited settlements and public apologies, but stopped short of full liability. The company's leadership still hoped that regional recalls and phased part replacements would be enough to weather the storm. It wasn't. The US DOJ steps in. Criminal charges in January 2017. Takata's facade finally collapsed. The U.S. Department of Justice charged the company with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit criminal acts. The allegations were explosive. Takata had falsified safety data sent to automakers. Engineers had manipulated test results. For over a decade, the company had failed to disclose known ruptures and fatalities. The DOJ declared that Takata's leadership had engaged in a long-standing scheme to deceive customers, regulators, and the public. To avoid further criminal prosecution, Takata pleaded guilty and agreed to a $1 billion settlement, including $25 million criminal fine, $125 million for personal injury victims and families of those killed, $850 million in restitution to automakers for recall costs as part of the plea deal. 3 former Takata executives were indicted. They remain fugitives, with Interpol red notices issued for their arrest. The bankruptcy. A giant falls by mid-2017. It was clear Takata couldn't survive. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the US and Japan. It listed more than $10 billion in liabilities, largely from recall costs, legal settlements, and restitution. To salvage what remained, Takata sold its remaining assets to Key Safety Systems, a Michigan-based automotive supplier owned by China's Ningbo Joyson Electronic Corp. The purchase price? Roughly $1.6 billion, a fraction of what Takata had once been worth. Key Safety Systems took over Takata's production facilities, IP and engineering assets, creating a new company, Joyson Safety Systems. Part of the agreement included assuming responsibility for ongoing recalls and replacement part production. Takata, once a global giant, had been dismantled, disgraced, and sold off, its legacy now a case study in corporate failure. The real cost of corporate negligence, Takata's collapse, sent shockwaves through the auto industry. But beyond the financial ruin and legal consequences, the scandal forced a reckoning around the following. Supplier accountability. Automakers can no longer blindly trust suppliers. They now require deeper visibility into quality control processes and independent validation of safety data. Whistleblower protection. Several Takata employees had attempted to raise red flags years earlier. Some were ignored. Others were pressured into silence. The industry began pushing for stronger whistleblower protections to prevent future cover-ups. Material science. Scrutiny. Takata's use of ammonium nitrate, a compound known for volatility, has been banned or heavily restricted by most automakers. New propellants are tested under accelerated aging, humidity exposure, and thermal cycling to prevent future chemical instability. Consumer safety awareness. The scandal raised public awareness of recalls. Drivers became more proactive about checking VIN numbers and understanding the components inside their vehicles. A reputation shattered. Perhaps the cruelest irony of all, Takata was once a symbol of safety. Its name was stamped inside millions of cars as a mark of quality. That brand recognition, once an asset, became its downfall. In the aftermath of the scandal, no car maker wanted to display the Takata name. Branding was scrubbed. Supplier relationships were severed. Executives distanced themselves from what was now a symbol of corporate greed and recklessness. Shigehisa Takata, the chairman, resigned in 2017 and offered a formal apology. But it was too late. Takata had become a parable. Chapter 4. Aftershocks, Legal Battles. Victim stories and worldwide reform. By the time Takata filed for bankruptcy and the recalls hit their peak, the damage was already done, not just to a corporation, but to real people whose lives had been shattered. Behind every statistic was a face, a story, a family left behind. This chapter focuses on the human cost, the legal aftermath, and the global reform movement sparked by the deadliest safety failure in automotive history, the human toll, more than numbers. The tragedy of the Takata scandal lies not only in the scale, but in the utter preventability of the deaths and injuries. Many of the fatalities occurred in what should have been survivable crashes, minor accidents, low-speed collisions, parking lot fender benders. Instead of cushioning and saving lives, the airbag inflators exploded with deadly force, sending metal shards into victims' faces, necks, and chests. Notable victim cases: Ashley Parham, 18, in 2009. She was killed in Oklahoma after a minor crash in a 2001 Honda Accord. The inflator exploded, and metal shrapnel punctured her neck. Jewel Brangman, 26. A college student and model, she died in 2014 while driving a rental car in Los Angeles. Her father, Alexander Brangman, became one of the most vocal advocates for recall reform, appearing before U.S. Congress. Hyen Tran, 51, died in 2014 in Orlando. Initially, investigators thought she had been stabbed. It was only later discovered that her airbag had exploded and sent metal into her throat. Joel Knight, 52, died in South Carolina when the airbag in his Ford Ranger exploded and a fragment pierced his neck in a minor accident. Each of these individuals was a daughter, a son, a parent, or a friend. Their deaths weren't due to reckless driving or vehicle failures. They were killed by the very system that was meant to protect them. Class actions and settlements, as the recall grew, so did the number of lawsuits. Victims and their families sought justice through civil litigation, and not just against Takata, but also against the automakers that installed their airbags. Major legal developments included multi-district litigation, MDL 2599 in the U.S., where more than 100 class action lawsuits were consolidated. The plaintiffs alleged that automakers knew, or should have known, about the defect and failed to warn consumers. In 2017, a $553 million settlement was reached between consumer plaintiffs and several automakers, including Honda, Toyota, BMW, Mazda, and Subaru. Takata's own $1 billion criminal plea included $125 million set aside for victims or their families who were not already part of civil settlements. However, legal challenges persisted. Some plaintiffs argued that automakers delayed recalling vehicles and issued confusing or inadequate warnings. Others sued rental car companies for not removing recalled vehicles from fleets. One of the most disturbing elements was the discovery that rental agencies and dealers continued to sell or lease cars with known, unrepaired airbags, endangering more lives even after the danger was public knowledge. Do not drive orders as more data became available. Regulators identified certain vehicles as having the highest risk of inflator rupture, especially older models from the early 2000s with non-desiccated ammonium nitrate inflators. In response, NHTSA issued urgent do not drive orders for vehicles such as 2001-2002, Honda Accord and Civic 2002-2003, Acura 2006 Ford Ranger 2006 Mazda, B-Series certain early 2000s BMW 3 Series. The messaging was stark: do not drive this vehicle until the airbag has been replaced. It could kill you. This level of urgency is rare in the automotive industry, but it demonstrated how unpredictably violent these ruptures could be, especially as the components aged. Even in 2024, such warnings continue to be reissued for vehicles that remain unrepaired, highlighting the long tail of this crisis. Global recall response. While the United States led the largest recall campaign, the Takata crisis was truly global. Countries around the world launched their own investigations and safety actions. Australia initiated its own national recall, impacting more than 3 million vehicles. The government even made repairs compulsory, threatening fines to car owners who didn't act. Japan, Takata's home country, saw major public outrage. Automakers like Toyota and Honda faced significant backlash, and some executives issued personal apologies. Germany, the UK, and Canada issued large-scale recall notices, although enforcement and compliance varied by region. In Malaysia, where multiple deaths occurred, consumer protection groups urged stricter automotive oversight, and Takata's name became synonymous with corporate betrayal. One of the unique challenges of the global response was tracking down old vehicles, especially in developing nations where used cars often move through multiple owners and between countries. In some regions, language barriers and limited infrastructure made it nearly impossible to notify all affected drivers. Engineering lessons. Materials testing and design. Out of the wreckage of the Takata scandal came a renewed focus on material science and airbag design. Key changes included ammonium nitrate bans. Nearly all automakers discontinued use of ammonium nitrate-based inflators. Regulatory bodies now strongly discourage or ban the use of this compound in new safety devices. Desiccants and sealing. Modern airbag inflators are now designed with moisture-absorbing desiccants and more robust sealing to prevent degradation from heat and humidity. Accelerated aging tests. New inflators must pass accelerated aging simulations to prove long-term stability in high-temperature and high-humidity environments. Global parts traceability. Automakers have improved their ability to track safety components by batch, date, and destination, allowing for quicker targeted recalls. These changes reflect a new reality. Safety systems must work not just on day one, but reliably for decades. Whistleblower impact. Several brave whistleblowers were instrumental in bringing Takata's wrongdoing to light. Mark Lilly, a former Takata engineer, told U.S. regulators that he had raised concerns internally about ammonium nitrate as early as 2000. He claimed the chemical was too volatile and had pushed for alternatives. Other engineers, test lab managers, and internal auditors came forward anonymously, revealing that test results were manipulated, inflators were shipped despite failures, and factory conditions were substandard, especially in plants like Monclova, Mexico. These whistleblowers played a critical role in forcing public transparency and legal accountability. Their stories also contributed to reforms that strengthen protections for employees who report corporate misconduct. Legislative reforms. The Takata crisis catalyzed legislative and policy reforms in several countries. United States, the FAST Act, 2015, empowered NHTSA to accelerate recall timelines and impose higher penalties. Rental car safety law, 2016, prohibited rental agencies from offering unrepaired recalled vehicles. Australia introduced laws to make certain recalls compulsory by law, enforceable by fines and license. Suspensions. Japan increased penalties for corporate misconduct in the automotive sector. Required more stringent documentation and traceability in the production of critical safety systems. These reforms, while reactive, laid the groundwork for more aggressive safety enforcement moving forward. Corporate reputation fallout for Takata. The fallout was terminal. But for automakers, the consequences were also severe. Honda, once Takata's closest partner, suffered massive reputation damage, especially in the U.S., where it was linked to the majority of deaths. Toyota and BMW were scrutinized for their slow response to initial warnings. Even companies like Ford, Mazda, and GM, who were later drawn in, faced public backlash as new deaths were linked to their models, the common criticism across the board. Why did it take so many deaths for you to act? This has pushed car makers to develop more proactive safety programs, invest in better supplier oversight, and reevaluate their crisis communication strategies. Public behavior. Shift. Before Takata, most consumers rarely paid attention to recall notices. After Takata, VinCheck websites spiked in traffic. People started asking, does my car have a Takata airbag? Is it safe to drive? Why didn't my dealer tell me sooner? This shift in public behavior has driven the industry to make recalls more visible on websites and dashboards, send SMS or email notices instead of relying solely on physical mail-build tools that allow real-time recall status checking via mobile apps. Chapter 5. Legacy of a Catastrophe. What Takata taught the world about power, profit, and accountability. Some corporate disasters fade quickly, remembered only by lawyers and stockholders. Others carve their names into history. The Takata airbag scandal is firmly in the second category. It wasn't just a product failure. It was a failure of ethics, governance, and human responsibility. Even after recalls were issued, fines were paid, and executives resigned, one question continued to echo. How did this happen? And why wasn't it stopped sooner? In this final chapter, we examine the long-term consequences of the scandal on consumers, automakers, suppliers, regulators, and the very future of automotive safety. A case study in catastrophic decision-making at its core. The Takata crisis was about a single fateful decision: choosing ammonium nitrate as a cost-effective airbag propellant, despite early warnings about its instability. This decision wasn't made in a vacuum. It was influenced by global pricing, pressure competition from other airbag suppliers' demands, from automakers for cost reductions, the desire to scale quickly and dominate the market. Takata didn't just ignore red flags. It actively manipulated safety data, dismissed internal concerns, and doubled down on a product that was inherently dangerous. It wasn't one bad call. It was a culture of silence and self-protection. And the result? Over 100 million airbags recalled, dozens of deaths, billions lost, and one of the most respected safety brands erased from the industry. What Takata exposed about the automotive industry. Takata's failure revealed uncomfortable truths that went far beyond one company. Supply chain blind spots. Automakers often rely heavily on suppliers, but don't always have visibility into their processes. Many OEMs trusted Takata's data without independent verification, a trust that proved fatal. Regulatory lag. Regulators were slow to act. NHTSA and equivalent agencies globally were reactive, not proactive. In some cases, it took years and multiple deaths before meaningful intervention happened. Corporate loyalty versus public safety. Some automakers continued doing business with Takata long after evidence emerged. Breaking a supplier relationship is complex and costly. But at what point does safety override loyalty? 4. Consumer apathy. Many consumers ignored recall notices, even after the dangers became public. This revealed a larger issue. Recalls are ineffective if people don't act. A new era of automotive safety culture. The sheer magnitude of the Takata recall forced a long-overdue revolution in how safety is managed in the automotive industry. Post-Takata. Changes include mandatory traceability of critical components, automated recall alerts, integrated into in-car dashboards, real-time recall check apps for mobile users, third-party lab testing for high-risk safety, systems mandatory data retention for inflator performance. Metrics. OEMs are now investing heavily in early warning systems, supplier audits, and scenario-based stress testing for all critical parts. The idea is to prevent another Takata, or at least catch it before it turns deadly. Takata's erased legacy. In many ways, Takata no longer exists. Its name has been scrubbed from automaker documentation. Websites, vehicle manuals, and supplier databases have replaced Takata with generic references to airbag modules. The new entity, Joyson Safety Systems, operates with full separation from the scandal and avoids using the Takata name entirely. There are no Takata logos on airbags anymore, no monuments, no legacy brand campaigns, just a name now synonymous with betrayal. Like Enron, Lehman Brothers, and Theranos, Takata has joined the list of once powerful institutions undone by arrogance and secrecy. Lessons for corporate accountability for business leaders. The Takata scandal is a harsh lesson in what happens when profits are prioritized above people. What could have been solved internally with transparency and reform before the first fatality was allowed to fester for over a decade. This wasn't just a failure of product design. It was a failure of corporate governance, moral courage, stakeholder responsibility. Boards of directors didn't act. Whistleblowers weren't protected. Regulators moved too late. And in the end, ordinary people paid the price. Today, business schools teach Takata as a cautionary tale, not about airbags, but about organizational blindness and ethical decay. Could this happen again? Sadly, yes. Despite reforms, complex global supply chains remain vulnerable. A new supplier could again cut corners. An automaker might ignore test data. Regulator might delay enforcement. The only real defense is culture. A corporate ecosystem where safety isn't negotiable, transparency is rewarded, speaking up is protected, accountability is enforced. If these values aren't embedded at every level, the next Takata isn't a question of if, but when. Final thoughts. The cost of silence. If there's one enduring theme in the Takata story, it's silence. Silence from executives, silence from partners, silence from regulators, and silence from consumers who ignored the warnings. But silence doesn't protect. It kills. Today, when you buckle up and see the airbag light blink on your dashboard, you trust that it's there to save your life. The irony is, for millions of drivers, that light once hid a hidden danger. Carlos Ghosn escaped in a box. Takata collapsed in secrecy. And the rest of us? We drive forward, hoping that history doesn't repeat itself, and knowing that sometimes the most dangerous part of the car is the one designed to save you.